I do that?
James will tell you how to do the amendment when there's talking points from it. It just basically talks about what the White House and Schwanitzer's attorney told us the other day.
Do I need to read this?
You have to explain the amendment.
Committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess pursuant to Committee Rule 2, House Rule 11, Clause 2. The chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote is ordered. We now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to notice, I call up the report recommending that the House of Representatives cite Mark Schwanitzer for contempt of Congress for purposes of markup and move that the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report.
Resolution recommending that the House of Representatives sign.
Without objection, the report be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Before recognizing myself for an opening statement, I forgot to recognize our newest member. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Ruley, was recently elected and, of course, as you all know, sworn in, gave amazing, I thought, remarks on the House floor. Mr. Ruley was elected to represent Ohio's 6th Congressional District. Before this election, he served in the Ohio Senate. We're excited to have him join our committee. The Ruley family has had grocery stores in Youngstown for like 1,000 years, and it's great to have you now as part of the Judiciary Committee, so we welcome you to the committee. Yeah, we should clap for that. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. That is what Special Counsel Hur found on page 1 of his report. On at least 3 occasions, Joe Biden, quote, read aloud classified notebook passages to his ghostwriter nearly verbatim. On page 200 of his report, Special Counsel Hur concluded that President Biden's disclosure of classified materials to Mr. Schwanitzer risked serious damage to America's national security. It's worth repeating that Special Counsel Hur said that President Biden had strong motivations to share classified information with his ghostwriter. In fact, he had 8 million reasons to ignore the rules. Joe Biden shared some of the classified materials he wasn't allowed to keep, with his ghostwriter, who was writing a book for which he was receiving an $8 million advance. All this, and yet Special Counsel Hur declined to prosecute Joe Biden because, quote, he is a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. And that brings us to today. Following the release of Special Counsel Hur's report, we subpoenaed 6 categories of information from Mr. Schwanitzer related to his work on President Biden's memoirs, including transcripts and audio recordings of his interviews with President Biden. To date, Mr. Schwanitzer has refused to comply with the committee's subpoena. The responsive documents in Mr. Schwanitzer's possession are necessary for our oversight. As an initial matter, we must know the extent to which President Biden disclosed classified materials to Mr. Schwanitzer and his intent behind disclosing that information. In order to do so, and to determine whether Special Counsel Hur appropriately carried out justice by not prosecuting the president, we need the audio recordings and the transcripts. Put simply, they are the best evidence of the president's mental state. Remember, on page 207 of his report, the special counsel said, Mr. Biden's memory also appeared to have significant limitations, both at the time he spoke to Schwanitzer in 2017, as evidenced by their recorded conversations, and today as evidenced by his recorded interview with our office. Special counsel concluded that some jurors may have reasonable doubts because President Biden's apparent lapses and failures in sharing the classified information with Mr. Schwanitzer would appear consistent with the diminished faculties and faulty memory he showed in the recorded interviews with his ghostwriter. Not only did Special Counsel Hur decline to prosecute President Biden, he also declined to prosecute Mr. Schwanitzer for obstruction of justice. Special Counsel Herr found that, quote, after learning of his investigation, Mr. Zwanitzer deleted digital audio recordings of his conversations with Mr. Biden, where President Biden, in fact, disclosed classified information to him. Audio recordings that the Special Counsel Herr found had significant evidentiary value to his investigation. We need to understand the extent to which Mr. Zwanitzer impeded Special Counsel Herr's investigation by deleting these recordings. But to do all of this, the committee needs the information we subpoenaed from Mr. Zwanitzer. No legal or constitutional privilege protects the information subpoenaed from disclosure. Mr. Zwanitzer has a legal obligation to turn over the requested materials pursuant to the subpoena, and his willful refusal to comply with our subpoena constitutes contempt of Congress. Our oversight is too important to allow Mr. Zwanitzer to willfully disregard our lawful subpoena. Now I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, we have an important oversight role in this committee. We oversee the Department of Justice, federal courts, federal antitrust policy, civil rights issues, federal law enforcement, and so much more. But we're not here today because of any of these legitimate areas for oversight. We're here today because after spending $20 million chasing dozens of conspiracy theories, MAGA Republicans have come up with nothing. In fact, the Republicans' stunning failure was made painfully obvious just yesterday when the Supreme Court ruled that the conspiracy theory underlying their signature investigation into social media companies was, quote, clearly erroneous. We're here today because there's a presidential debate tonight, and MAGA Republicans have decided the best way they can help President Trump is by bullying and intimidating a private citizen to obtain information about his highly sensitive and deeply personal conversations with President Biden. We're here today because Republicans are, in a word, desperate. This contempt resolution against Mr. Zwanitzer is an abuse of the committee's oversight authority, pure and simple. Decorum and collegiality have clearly departed this chamber in favor of MAGA extremism when this committee harasses a private citizen to intimidate him into giving the chairman whatever he wants in his quest to find something damaging to use against President Biden. Earlier this week, we received a letter that White House counsel Ed Siskel sent to Mr. Zwanitzer's attorney in which the White House said, quote, the committee's subpoena seeks broad swaths of personal information that President Biden provided to your client in confidence as part of the process for writing his memoirs. The vast majority of this information is private. The committee's subpoena is therefore a congressional subpoena for the president's information, which unavoidably pits the political branches against one another. Unfortunately, the committee has thrust your client into the middle of this interbranch conflict. The letter continues, quote, your client is not authorized to provide any of the president's information until it has been reviewed for executive branch confidentiality concerns and a resolution of these constitutional issues between the two branches has been reached, close quote. Mr. Siskel also wrote to the chairman directly, advising him that, quote, the executive branch is ready and willing to engage in good faith with the committee in response to its purported interest in this matter. In other words, the committee's fight is not with Mr. Zwanitzer. It's with the executive branch, and that's who it should be negotiating with. And according to Mr. Siskel's letter to the chairman, Republicans have not engaged in negotiations with the White House at all. But we're not here today to engage in good faith negotiations. We're here today because the majority has instead chosen to bully and intimidate a private citizen because they think they can break him before they break the executive branch. They desperately want the audio recordings of Mr. Zwanitzer's dozens of hours of private interviews with President Biden conducted when they worked together on Promise Me, Dad, a memoir detailing President Biden's loss of his son when he was vice president. I would like to read some of the entries from this book so that as we move forward with this ridiculous contempt proceeding today, we can all keep in mind what kind of information and recorded conversations Republicans want to acquire and weaponize against President Biden. In his book, the president recalls telling his dying son, quote, I will never stop doing everything I can to keep you alive, to keep you with us. It's okay if you go now. It's okay if you don't fight anymore. It's okay to go to sleep. He recalls his son telling him, you've got to promise me, Dad, that no matter what happens, you're going to be all right. Give me your word, Dad. You're going to be all right. President Biden recalls making an entry in his diary after his son's diagnosis, writing, quote, no Thanksgiving would ever be quite the same. I pulled out my diary and started to write. I did have one big item for my own Christmas list that year, but I was keeping it to myself. Naval Observatory, November 30th, 2014, 7:30 p.m. Just home from Nantucket. I pray we have another year together in 2015. Bo, 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 Bo. He recalled making another entry. As Air Force 2 took off, I felt compelled to open up my diary and write, March 29th, leaving MD Anderson with hope. Bo is an amazing man, as is Hunter. He is staying with Bo until the next procedure. I'll be coming back. I paused. What else was there to say? I was afraid if I really opened up, I would give in to a lurking despair, and I could not allow that to happen. I could not allow Bo or anyone else to see that, ever. I set aside the diary until the flight was nearly over, then picked it up again to add one line. Just landed, 6:07. I feel so goddamn lonely. He also recalls watching his son wither before his eyes. My eye was drawn to Bo as we talked. It wasn't yet late in the evening, but it was already tiring. He was so gaunt, and his face seemed drained of color. I could see the outlines of the leg brace through his pants. Bo had been losing recall of more and more proper nouns lately, and he seemed less willing to fight through it. Ashley, Bo's sister, had told me that Bo was no longer inviting her into the room for his speech therapy because his decline really bothered him. Bo said almost nothing that chilly February night in Washington. He would whisper something to his brother instead, and Hunter would speak for him. Unquote. I think most parents would agree, watching your child suffer and die is the worst possible torment you can imagine. And that tragedy, that heart-wrenching, gut-churning agony that President Biden endured is what Republicans want to use against him. Their desperation knows no bounds. And don't let them pretend here that they have compassion for President Biden's loss or that this request has anything to do with oversight. If this committee really wanted to conduct oversight, they would work in good faith with the DOJ and the White House, not employ intimidation tactics and punitive subpoenas against a private citizen. They don't want to conduct legitimate oversight. They want to get those audio files to help MAGA Republicans this election cycle. Mark my words. If Republicans get these files, their priority will be getting altered and context-free audio clips into Republican campaign ads, not doing the real work of the American people. This is about digging for embarrassing audio of President Biden when he was in a vulnerable state discussing the death of his son. This is about their political game. Oversight Chairman James Comer said so himself in an email. He said if he gets the tapes, he will release them for the purpose of demonstrating, quote, Biden's mental state to convince, quote, swing voters. What more evidence do you need? And in case I have to explain this, demanding material to that makes a subpoena enforceable in court. Despite Republicans' desperate attempts to feign a substantive need for these files, one simply does not exist. Today's markup is about making the chosen Republican leader, Donald Trump, happy by hunting down any possible vulnerabilities of President Biden. And to achieve that goal, this committee is willing to put a target on the back of an American citizen, a private American citizen who has already been cleared of wrongdoing in this very matter. Frankly, this is frightening. Trump is weaponizing this MAGA Republican-led committee to get information on his opponent, President Biden, at any cost, even if it means publicly flogging an American citizen trying to live a private life. And I have to wonder, is this just the beginning? Is this what we have to look forward to? If Trump gets a second term, is this the playbook? Anyone, public official or private citizen, who doesn't give Trump what he wants will have the weight of the government hammered down on them? Anyone who questions Trump's authority will have his name fed to Trump's ravenous far-right supporters to instill fear and submission. Anyone who asserts their constitutional rights to get in the way of a Republican agenda will be held in contempt by Trump's enablers in Congress. That is not an America I want to live in. That is not the American democracy I have devoted my career to fighting for. And I know this is not the country the American people want. Every American should sit up in fear watching this public attack on a private citizen. If he isn't safe from this kind of government abuse, what makes you think you are? I urge members to oppose this dangerous resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would just add, Mr. Zwanitzer is in fact a private citizen who tried to destroy evidence once an investigation was announced, the very evidence we seek in our subpoena that he fails to comply with. That's why we're here. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes himself for the purposes of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to the
Without
committee.
objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purpose of the amendment. The chair now recognizes himself to explain the amendment. The amendment makes a grammatical change on page 5 of the report. It does not change the substance of the report. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized, excuse me.
Thank you. I am not surprised that the majority has taken this ridiculous fight with the executive branch to a private citizen. They're bullies. Mr. Zwanitzer is a writer and director, not a political figure. And his attorney has repeatedly explained that Mr. Zwanitzer is not in a position to determine what materials he can share with this committee, especially when the executive branch has asserted significant interest in this material. Going after a private citizen who is now caught between two branches of government is not only legally bankrupt, but also an unjustified abuse of power. Mr. Zwanitzer set out to write a memoir in President Biden's name about the death of his son, Beau. Nothing more. He's now caught in a legal battle in which he has no stake, all because the majority on this committee is desperate to get its hands on any material related to President Biden in order to justify its relentless and fruitless investigation into anything and everything related to this administration. Congress is supposed to work for the people, for people like Mr. Zwanitzer, who, in addition to his work with President Biden on his memoir, is working on a documentary about the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad. Instead, the majority is attacking the people, the very people it is supposed to protect and represent. I refuse to be associated with this attack on a private citizen, and I refuse to be associated with the members of this committee who are leading this charge. And as the ranking member said, this has been timed for the debate. It has been timed for the election. It is nothing more than a political stunt, and it is an abuse of power. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if my friend from North Carolina would engage in a colloquy. So I'd like to pose a question to Ms. Ross, given what was just said. Mr. Zwanitzer was the ghostwriter of what you just described, and the ranking member before you described as a book about the death of President Biden's son. Why was President Biden, according to Special Counsel Hur, reading from classified materials about Afghanistan to his ghostwriter in a book that was solely about the death of President Biden's son? You don't care to answer? I can understand.
I didn't yield, and I don't have any information about that.
I see.
So I
Okay.
suggest that you use your
No,
4
I'm not looking for
minutes
your- I'll reclaim my
to address
time then,
the
if you-
contempt
Time
resolution.
belongs
my
to the
time.
gentleman from North Carolina.
Yeah, that's my time. I offered to engage in a colloquy which would have the effect of refuting the absurd allegation that you made. But I can understand why you don't want to answer, because it's an irrefutable point. No one that I know about who's interested in securing Mr. Zwanitzer's compliance with the lawful process served upon him has had anything to say about the death of Beau Biden. No one's read from the parts of the book about Beau Biden to frame this matter. The question is, why was Joe Biden reading from classified materials to somebody without a security clearance in a matter for which he was going to be paid $8 million. And this Congress needs to investigate and consider what is necessary, and it is the committee vested by this House of Representatives with inquiring into the grounds for impeachment of the selfsame president. And the hypocrisy is mind-blowing. I wonder if Steve Bannon could imagine that someone might, for a political purpose, pursue a contempt resolution. But there's no political purpose here. It is the responsibility of this person who received classified information to provide what he has to this committee to evaluate. It's just almost, it's unspeakable. I was thinking about the legislative purpose that was cited in order to secure the personal private income tax returns of President Trump. We can all say with certainty that there was no motivation of a political sort involved in that. Wow. Calling the tune requires playing by the tune. But Mr. Zwanitzer is an ordinary citizen. The process served upon him to compel him to provide information to this committee. Straightforward. He has, with the most frivolous of arguments, flouted his responsibility under law. It is this committee's responsibility to proceed. That's how it works. It's very simple, nothing more to it than that. It's time we get on with it. I'm fully in support of the ANS. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield to anyone else who wants the time.
The time.
Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you very much. When we listen to the first two speakers for Across the Aisle, it is clear that they are infected with TDS. The ranking member could not utter a sentence without mentioning MAGA. But it gets to the point that Mr. Bishop, my friend, made. The ranking member said that we want to get a hold of, and quote, sensitive and deeply personal conversations with Zwanitzer, close quote. This was for a book that was going to be published. These were classified documents. And you want to tell us, oh, we want access to sensitive, deeply personal conversations with his ghostwriter who was making a bundle of money to publish a book. That's not deeply sensitive and personal. What it was illegal. The special counsel said he had classified documents from the time he was even the senator, some of which were still classified. And then Zwanitzer, showing a guilty mind, destroyed evidence when he was confronted about it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today is a sad day in history, in the history of this particular committee, that we have stooped to the point of trying to intimidate and bully a private citizen, a journalist, no doubt, who has collaborated with President Biden at some of his most sensitive moments about very sensitive issues, the death of his son. And this committee is using its power to try to get at some audio tapes between this journalist and President Biden, wherein President Biden is discussing these kinds of sensitive matters. And the only reason why the other side is doing it is because they're now trying to scrape up as much information as they can to make Donald Trump happy, because he needs fodder for campaign ads. And so that's why this audio is important to my friends on the other side of the aisle, just to appease President Trump. And, you know, fact of the matter is this is the outgrowth of of $20 million in taxpayer money having been spent by this committee and this Congress investigating President Biden and Hunter Biden, trying to find evidence of a criminal gang as they have billed it. They have come up with no evidence after spending that much money and all of the staff time. They've not been able to come up with any evidence of corruption by President Biden or his family, which they call a crime family. This committee has been front and center in that investigation. It has been fruitless. In addition to this committee, you've had folks like Robert Hur, a special counsel, a holdover from the Trump administration, special counsel, who looked into classified documents that were found and turned over by President Biden that were in his possession after he had left office. And Robert Hur looked into it to determine whether or not there was any criminal liability. And he found none, but he chose on his way out issuing a final report to include in that report inappropriate characterizations of the president's mental competency, President Biden's mental competency, for the express purpose that was a giant breadcrumb offered to this committee to enable them to follow up on that as they are doing right now. So in addition to those fruitless rabbit hole investigations, now we have morphed into, okay, we need to get the audio files of the Ghostwriter for President Biden. Isn't that a ridiculous use of this committee's time, that we're sitting here and a private citizen is being bullied and intimidated and threatened, a journalist, by this committee? It's really a sad day. The American people see that this is doing nothing to make life better for them. This is just an outgrowth of a rabbit hole investigation. It'll go nowhere. We're wasting our time. The American people expect us to do the business that makes their lives better. That's what we need to be about, putting people over politics. And so I will yield back the balance of my time. This is a sad day.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentleman from California is recognized.
If the MAGA impeachment investigation was a missing person, we'd all have Amber Alerts on our phones a long time ago. And that's what this is really about. They promised you that they were going to have the goods to impeach the president, and they failed. They came up short. You've got nothing, nada, zilch, zero. It's a big goose egg. And so you're just screwing around now on the margins with this batting practice, exhibition, preseason game-like exercise because you're not ready for prime time. I'll yield to anyone who will tell me when you're bringing your impeachment vote. If anyone wants to tell me, because you promised the American people you were going to impeach President Biden. So bring it. I'll yield. Bring it. Come on. You promised the American people. Bring it. Don't screw around with this
I'll be glad
stuff.
to speak to that.
Yeah. Do you have a vote, Mr. Bishop?
Yeah.
Okay, make the motion.
Here's
make
the
the
answer.
motion.
Here's the answer.
Make the motion.
No,
Come on.
you didn't ask me to
Come
make a
on,
motion.
big
You
man.
asked me to
You talked
explain
about
when
this
it would
all the
occur.
time.
You want me to
Come
answer
on.
you? Was it a question you
You're a
want to
big
answer?
man, right? You talk about impeaching the president. Bring the motion.
I'll be glad to answer your
Come on.
question if you want an
Bring
answer.
the motion.
You
Come
mean
on,
you don't
Biggs.
want an answer?
Come on, Biggs, bring the motion. Stop wasting our time. You're wasting our time.
Here's the answer.
You're
As
wasting
soon as
our
they
time.
stop
Bishop, come
stonewalling
on.
the investigation,
Bishop,
we can
you
get
got
to the next
nothing.
step.
You guys got nothing because Joe Biden has been acquitted. And this is just a pathetic post-game of a exercise that yielded nothing. This is embarrassing. It's embarrassing and it's a waste of time. You have people sitting in here who are wearing shirts that say moms demand action. Do you think moms are demanding impeachment? No. They want their kids to be safe in their classroom from gun violence. You actually sit on a committee that can do that. Man, come here and do something. You have a colleague right now who's trying to put the Attorney General in handcuffs with this Anna Paulina lunacy because she can't accept that the former president was arrested and convicted. In her own district, she has some of the highest home ownership insurance rates in the country. Her state has a 6-week abortion ban. And this is the lunacy that she's coming here and focusing on? Guys, it's over. It's dead. It's rigor mortis. And it's time to move on. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Votes have been called on the floor. We have a bunch of them, too. I think like 20 votes. So the committee will be in recess while they're speeding up the time on that first vote. So we will go vote, and then we'll come back and pick up where we left off. The committee stands in recess.